Well, let me get the pleasantries, deal with those first. Congratulations to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. It's tremendous news yesterday overnight, and obviously we'll be looking forward to celebrate that good news while they're enjoying their stay here in Australia. They'll be neighbours of Jenny and I for the next week or so, and I'm sure we'll take the opportunity to congratulate them both in person. But today, on a more serious note, I wanted to make a number of statements with the Foreign Minister in relation to our government's position on Israel and issues in the Middle East. Now, the first thing I want to stress very strongly is the government's commitment to a two-state solution in the Middle East remains, has always been, and I believe always will be, Australia's policy in relation to the resolution of issues of Israel and Palestine. We are committed to a two-state solution, and nothing has changed when it comes to the government's position on this matter. In dealing with the matters, though, that are coming up this week in the United Nations General Assembly, though, and in particular in relation to the vote that will be held on Wednesday morning regarding concessions and conference of official status on the Palestinian Authority to chair the G77. This is a significant vote. Our government will be voting against that resolution. We won't be abstaining. We'll be voting against that resolution because we don't believe that conferring that status, especially at this time, would add to the cause of moving parties towards the two-state solution. This is our objective. This is what we're seeking to achieve. In the context of that decision, as a new Prime Minister, I believed it was important to ensure that Australians and others had a much clearer picture of my broader position on these issues that are raised in relation to the Middle East and the many particular points of policy that relate. First of all, there is the issue regarding the Iran nuclear deal and the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that has been in place and that Australia has voiced support for over the last 3 years. There are also issues that go to the question of the capital, which come up quite regularly in these discussions around policy relating to Israel. There is also a long-standing and improving greatly defence relationship with our ally in Israel and the defence industry cooperation that has only been improving, particularly in more recent years, as Australia has significantly recapitalised our defence forces. So taking each of those issues in turn, we share serious concerns about potentially destabilising behaviour in the Middle East when it comes to the activities of Iran, and the government has taken the decision to review, and I should stress without prejudice, the Iran nuclear agreement, the JCPOA, to determine whether our current policy settings remain fit for purpose. Now, this review will include assessment of the IAEA and other agencies' advice on Iran's compliance with the agreement and on whether the JCPOA can meet our long-term objective of preventing Iran from having the capability to develop nuclear weapons. Now, there are matters that currently exist outside that arrangement, which have been noted, and we need to be working with our other allies, including the United States, to determine how we can best address those other issues outside that agreement regarding terrorism and matters of that nature and how they're financed and sponsored, and these things need to be brought into that discussion, and we think that's very important to resolution of issues and creating a safer and more peaceful Middle East. In relation to defence engagement with Israel, I spoke to the Israeli Prime Minister last night and proposed that we appoint defence attachés in each of our embassies, Australia and in Tel Aviv and, of course, Israel here in Canberra. And that will only further enhance the cooperation on defence matters and security matters, but also on the defence industry collaboration. Now, in relation to our diplomatic presence in Israel, what I have simply said is this: we're committed to a two-state solution. Australia's position on this issue has, to date, assumed that it is not possible to consider the question of the recognition of Israel's capital in Jerusalem, and that be consistent with pursuing a two-state solution. Now, Dave Sharma, who was the ambassador to Israel, has proposed some months ago a way forward that challenges that thinking. And it says that you can achieve both, and indeed by pursuing both, you are actually aiding the cause for a two-state solution. Now, when people say sensible things, I think it's important to listen to them, and particularly when they have the experience of someone like Dave Sharma. We are committed to a two-state solution, but frankly, it hasn't been going that well. Not a lot of progress has been made. And you don't keep doing the same thing and expect different results. And so when sensible suggestions are put forward that are consistent with your policy positioning, and in this case pursuing a two-state solution, Australia should be open-minded to this. And I am open-minded to this. And our government is open-minded to this. The proposal that Dave spoke about in his article back in May provided the opportunity for a capital for a Palestinian Authority in East Jerusalem and one for Israel in West Jerusalem. The whole point of a two-state solution is two nations recognised living side by side. And so opening up that discussion does provide us with the opportunity, I think, to do what Australians have always done, and that is to play a practical and common sense and an innovative role in trying to work with partners around the world to aid our broader objectives, in this case, a two-state solution. So Australia and I, as Prime Minister, am open to that suggestion. What I'll do in the months ahead is obviously confer with Cabinet colleagues. I'll obviously take the opportunity during the upcoming summit season to confer with other leaders around the world, and gauge their perception about this, and to make the case that Dave himself has made about whether this can actually provide an alternative way forward and aid the cause that I believe all of us are interested in pursuing. So no decision has been made in regarding the recognition of a capital or the movement of an embassy. And I should be clear, those two things, they're the two issues. You can recognise a capital. The issue of the real estate on your embassy is a separate one. And as Dave argues in his article, those things can be dealt with sequentially. But at the same time, what we are simply doing is being open to that suggestion as a potential way forward. And I'm not going to close my mind off to things that can actually be done better and differently to aid the great cause of Australian foreign policy. And that's all we have said today. We're open to that discussion, and I look forward to pursuing that with people and colleagues and leaders around the world. So we're happy to take questions, and as is Maurice. Obviously, we've been in the process over the last 24 hours of informing and briefing allies and partners, and that process will continue.
Prime Minister, Dave Sharma wrote his article in May. Just recently as June, you were emphatic about not moving the embassy. Is this decision motivated by Wentworth or keeping the Conservatives in your party happy, or both?
It's not motivated by either. It's motivated by our commitment to a two-state solution and listening to practical suggestions about how we can achieve it. In June, I articulated the government's policy. I was the Treasurer. The Treasurer is not responsible for matters of foreign affairs. It's my job to articulate and speak to government policy as it existed at the time.
Is it the government's position to support it's okay to be white motion?
Why don't we stay with Israel and foreign affairs for a while, and I'll come back to that.
Prime Minister, one of the biggest supporters of Donald Trump's move to move the embassy to Jerusalem was American evangelical Christians. Do you believe, as a Christian, that the restoration of the Jewish temple in Israel in Jerusalem is a precondition to the return of Jesus?
My faith and my religion has nothing to do with this decision.
Nothing at all?
None.
I have a question for the Foreign Minister, actually, because I think if you've been talking to neighbours and other national leaders or other national foreign policy ministers, can I ask what would the reaction from Israel be to this, from Indonesia be to this move? Would Indonesia object to this position by Australia?
Well, the Prime Minister can speak to his engagement with President Widodo, but we've obviously briefed the Indonesian ambassador here in Australia and communicated through our embassy in Jakarta with the Indonesian Foreign Minister, and we'll continue those conversations. I think it's... Well, I think it's a conversation that we're having. We have to explain, and we are doing that this morning with the release of a press statement and this press conference this morning, and we'll continue those conversations.
And the key point that I've made in my connection with President Widodo is the Australian government has not changed its policy on a two-state solution. The Australian government has not made a decision to actually recognise Jerusalem as the capital or to shift our embassy. We have not made a decision to change our policy when it comes to the Iran nuclear deal. All we have said is that, consistent with our commitment to a two-state solution, we are reviewing without prejudice the Iran nuclear deal, and we are open to the arguments that have been made by our former ambassador to Israel about how we could progress that issue in the context of a two-state solution. So the nuances of this, the calibration of this, is what we are doing. I also want to make this point. Australia, our government, I have made this decision without any reference to the United States. It has not come up in any discussion I've had with the President or with officials. Maurice has just recently been in the US. There has been no request and there has been no discussion with the United States. Australia makes its decisions about its foreign policy independently. We do so in our own national interests, consistent with our own beliefs and our own values.
Given the fact that there has been no discussion or no request from the United States and other allies, doesn't that only add to people who are questioning the timing of this announcement, given it's just a few days out from a by-election, which our former ambassador to Israel is running behind it?
Well, I think the point you overlook is that Australia has no control over when votes are scheduled in the United Nations General Assembly. There is a vote tomorrow morning. On Wednesday, Australia will be voting no. Now, that is a significant decision. And in my view, as a new Prime Minister of only just over 7 weeks, that would raise questions about, well, where do I stand on a range of other issues? And I thought it was important that that context to be provided straight away. Look, I'm being upfront with Australians. I'm being upfront with leaders and others around the world. This is our thinking on this issue. We think after 3 years of the Iran nuclear deal, it is timely to have a good look and see whether it's meeting our objectives. Is it adding to greater stability or is it not? I think they're fair questions. And I think if we're going to say internally that we're going to look at this question again, that we should say publicly that we're doing that. Equally, on the question of the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital, I do find those arguments persuasive that Dave has put forward, but are they achievable? Can they be taken through? Is there a consultation process we now need to follow, particularly with regional leaders and other leaders around? Of course there is. But I am signaling that I think it's a conversation worth having. A discussion is not a decision, but I think I'm being upfront with people. I'm being very clear about what my dispositions are and how I'm forming these decisions. And that's how I want to deal with the Australian people and others. Yeah, I think people know where I stand, and I think that can be a great comfort when people know where their Prime Minister stands on these sorts of questions.
What's the view of the current ambassador?
The fact that Wentworth has a large Jewish community has not been a factor in your thinking at all?
No, I've obviously over the last 7 weeks have had quite a number of discussions, not just in Sydney but in Melbourne and other parts of the country, about these issues, and people from the Jewish community have been raising this with me. From day one. From day one. It was literally put to me in the first couple of days of me becoming Prime Minister. And I'm not rushing into anything here. But what I am doing today is recognising what is a real concern in the Jewish community in Australia, whether it's about the Iran nuclear deal, which is an item of great concern to that community, or it's on this broader question of the two-state solution and how we go about achieving it. See, we want to see a two-state solution achieved. And sometimes to achieve that, you've got to think about doing things differently. The orthodoxy that has driven this debate, which says issues like considering the question of the capital are taboo, I think we have to challenge that. Australians are pretty upfront people, and I think we have to show the courage of our convictions in saying we're prepared to talk about other ways about achieving this goal, because frankly the other ways have not been getting us there terribly successfully.
What about the concern in the Palestinian community when America moved
their embassy there was obviously a large outbreak and violence. Are you concerned about a potential outbreak of protest here, demonstrations or violence or retribution against Australia at all?
Well, obviously we've been taking advice on those matters, and assessments and processes are being followed. But again, this is why I'm urging a full appreciation of the position I'm putting forward. We are having a discussion about this. We are opening up a new discussion, which is consistent with what I believe those who are committed to peace in the Middle East, whether from a Palestinian perspective or an Israeli perspective, we're committed to a two-state solution. I'm not doing this because I think it will take us away from that outcome. I'm doing it because I believe it will take us towards that outcome, and that I think we need to be prepared to be open-minded about new ways of achieving this. And Australia, I think, has always demonstrated a preparedness to show innovativeness, innovation in thinking when it comes to addressing these global issues.
The Defence Secretary Francis Adamson described the American move as being unhelpful back when that was made. Have you sought her advice before coming?
Well, of course, the government listens to all of its officials, but the government is the one that is elected. The government and I as Prime Minister are the ones that have to articulate the policy and the position of our government. We will listen to all of our officials on this, but I must, and I'm not making any comment on any particular advice which we have received from any part of the public service.
Can we ask you
But I haven't finished my statement. What I'm saying, though, is that we want to see the outcome of a two-state solution. And following the orthodoxy of positions past, I don't believe has been making enough progress. So I'm prepared to challenge those positions wherever they may be put. And we may be standing amongst a very small number of countries who actually think this may be a better way to achieve this. But we are passionate about achieving it. And our passion is demonstrated, I think, in the courage of being able to identify that there may be better ways about getting to this goal.
Senator Payne, your predecessor, Julie Bishop, when Donald Trump walked away from the Iran nuclear deal, your predecessor warned that could imperil efforts to reach a nuclear treaty with North Korea. Is that a concern you share, or is that no longer a concern?
Well, we have an obvious focus, as we have continually, on complete, verifiable, irreversible disarmament, nuclear disarmament, in North Korea and in Iran and in the countries who would pursue the same policies. That is an absolute focus of our national interests. And the review the Prime Minister has announced is, I think, after 3 years' operation of the JCPOA, a timely look at whether it is actually achieving the outcomes that it was intended to do. We are not a party to the JCPOA, but I think we have every opportunity here to review its progress, to review its status, and to ensure it is delivering on those outcomes. This is a good time to do that. It fits with the Prime Minister's review of these other issues, and I am confident that we'll be able to engage in that in a very constructive way.
Just before we go, because I know that other question earlier. What's yours on that?
The issue, if I could
the issue of the day?
The question is, are you going to be looking at a solution on the treatment of children on Nauru and whether they can get any medical treatment in Australia? That's been raised by some of your MPs. Yeah,
it is, and I've been meeting with those colleagues, as have the relevant ministers, and we have been acting on those issues. We have been acting on these issues. We haven't been doing it by making public statements about it every day, but we will always consider each and every case on its merits and in the interests of the child, and we will continue to do that. I did make the point yesterday in relation to the New Zealand arrangement that there is a bill still sitting in the Senate from 2016 that would close the back door from New Zealand to Australia, which is opposed by the Labor Party and the Greens and crossbench senators, which is preventing that protection being put in place. And I would urge them to reconsider their position on that. But on the other issue?
Was it a directive from the Attorney General Christian Porter's office that the government should support this it's okay to be white motion?
Yeah, well, I'm sure all Australians stand against racism in whatever form it takes, but the Leader of the Government and the Senate will be making a statement about that later today. I'm saying the Leader of the Government and the Senate will be making comments on that later today.
Sorry? Pauline Hanson did, was that wrong? Opponents say this Australia have the extreme right playbook, others say that there's nothing wrong with this motion. What's your position?
Well, I found it regrettable, but the Leader of the Government will be making, in the Senate, will be making a statement on that shortly. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.